we see you on the big screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear us.
Oh, your audio is off.
See? Okay, and you're muted.
I hear you just fine.
Great, and that's progress. And our videographer said if you guys could tilt your camera down just a little bit, we'd frame your faces better. There you go. Perfect. Hey, thank you. Okay, you can see we've got a big crowd tonight. We had planned to have a camera on the screen so you can see what the screen is showing. We're still working on making that work, but at least you can see the crowd. We explained the difficulty, and we appreciate your effort to be with us tonight. We know that you had some problems, but the important part is we can see you and you can hear us. So we're going to have a good time tonight. And I'm not sure if we're going to have slides for it. Our next program is going to be on November 1st, and it's going to be a continuation of our Great Power Competition series, and it's going to be on space. We'll have Charles Galbraith, who is the Senior Space Fellow at the Mitchell Institute, come talk about Great Power Competition and space. And we're looking at getting General Kevin Chilton to join that group. You may remember a few years ago he came and spoke about space in a previous life. Kevin was an astronaut and commander of the Strategic Command, so he's a great guy, and hopefully he'll be able to join us on that also. So tonight our program is a continuation of the Great Power Series. We're fortunate to have with us virtually Dr. Cynthia Watson and Dr. Bud Cole. Both are Professors Emerita from the National War College, and both are career-long experts in the People's Republic of China. Now, some of you AFA members may remember a few years ago we did a Zoom conference with Dr. Watson during COVID on China, so we're really glad that she agreed to join us again along with Dr. Cole. Dr. Watson culminated a 30-year career at the National War College in 2022, retiring as acting provost. Dr. Cole served for 30 years as a Navy Surface Warfare Officer, all in the Pacific, and later taught at the National War College. So they bring a total, they combined 60 years of experience in what is arguably our most important strategic challenge and relationship. So as always tonight, we'll have a chance to ask questions. We'll do that in three ways, and most of you have been through this before. You can send a question by email to that address there on the screen. Not on the screen yet. There we go. It will come to me, and I'll catch it on my iPhone and relay that. You can also use the question cards that are on the table. Just take that card, write out the question, hold it up, and one of our cadets will pick it up and bring it up to me. And finally, at the end, we'll take live questions if we have time. So raise your hand, we'll bring you a microphone. Wait for the microphone because we're recording this. We want to make sure we get your question for the record. So for more than half a century, the United States and China have moved from a cautious engagement to strategic competition, and today China has emerged as arguably first among our great power rivals. Perhaps the defining question of our time is not whether China and the United States are competitors. We know they are. China is engaged today in a force buildup that far outstrips ours, and one question is whether or not we can manage the competition without allowing Taiwan to become the catalyst for a catastrophic conflict. Well, Taiwan is top of mind for most of us. There's a lot more in the relationship with China, and we'll dig into some of those issues tonight. In just a minute, I'll invite Dr. Watson, Dr. Cole to provide opening remarks. Then I'll have a couple lead-off questions, and then we'll take your questions. So start working on them early, and I've already got one question card up, so you can do those anytime. Let me make one quick announcement before I continue here. On the table out front, you'll see this reprint of a magazine article about our NDBS program. You can pick up those flyers, pick one up, copy it, give it to your friends, or take several and pass those around because we're really proud of this article. It really does showcase what we're all about. So Cynthia and Brad, I hope you can hear us and see us. We're sorry you couldn't be with us in person because this is a great audience. Always appreciate it. It's a great venue. But thanks for powering through the rushes and joining us. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you for your opening remarks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta turn volume on. Okay, there you go.
Well, good evening. I'm very sorry we can't join you this evening, but we're very honored to be addressing such a distinguished audience. I have to note that both Dr. Watson and myself have worked for a number of different U.S. government agencies and educational institutions, think tanks over the years. And all our remarks tonight reflect only our own beliefs and don't reflect those of any of the people we've previously worked for. Next slide, please. One of the questions that also often arises about China in the 21st century is Beijing trying to dominate East Asia. Well, as this map designates or shows, most of East Asia is China. Not just geographically, but also culturally, linguistically, and certainly economically. China is everybody's largest economic trading partner in East Asia, including Japan, for instance. Slide. This next slide puts even a larger scale perspective on China's position in the world. One of the interesting facts to me is that the four largest coal reserves in the world, energy reserves, are Russia, China, India, and the fourth is the United States. Excellent.
Hey, Bud, let me interrupt you just a second. We're not seeing your slides, so you may want to share your slides.
They are, I hit share and I'm surprised you're not seeing them. But let me try again.
Apologize for that.
Well, we practiced this about 2 hours ago. It worked great.
Yeah, well, okay.
Chinese are hacking the
You're still not seeing them?
Yeah, I think we had your desktop there for a second. We just weren't seeing the slides, Cynthia.
Let me get that.
Huh. Well,
I'll tell you what, we can actually show your slides from here.
that would be great. We're up to slide number 3 on core elements.
Okay, let me see if our Ace Audio Visual guy here can bring those up. Okay, Chuck, I think it's down a step the other way. Okay, at the second map.
There we go.
Okay, Cynthia, we're on the first map
Yeah.
of East. It's titled East Asia.
As I said, the idea about China dominating East Asia is almost irrelevant in normal terms, since geography shows their current dominance not only in land mass, but also economically, socially, linguistically, and arguably ethnically. And geography doesn't change. I mean, the borders might change with some of China's neighbors, but Taiwan's always going to be about 100 nautical miles off the coast of China. The next chart, the next map, is just simply a different perspective of how China fits in the Eurasian landmass. Obviously, a very major player with Russia, and without little doubt, the most powerful nation in that entire huge landmass, given Moscow's current economic and military problems. The next slide is probably the basis of most of my comments. The idea of comprehensive national power probably dates back to some Russian theorists in the 19th century. It is a particularly, or Beijing is particularly fond of the concept of comprehensive national power. I won't read the slide to you. The elements that comprise CNP are shown here, all relatively logical. China goes a step further and they assign mathematical values to each of these elements, trying to come up with some score that might be the United States 93 and China 89 or vice versa. As you can see, they all demonstrate the importance of what we call the national elements of power, military, economic, and so forth. The problem with numbers coming out of China is a basic unreliability. Oftentimes intentional, oftentimes just simply unknown. There's an old Chinese expression that the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. Therefore, local government officials can choose often to submit statistics that please them rather than the boss in Beijing. One particular little factoid that I always amuses me, it has to do with the idea of resources. China seems very good, strong about green development, and in fact lead the world in the development of green energy sources. But that said, many years ago, in an effort to control air quality, Beijing passed a law to apply to the coal-fired power plants in southern China, in Guangzhou and Guangdong. The problem was that the fine they threatened to levy on those who did not install scrubbers on their coal-fired powered plant exhaust systems was less than the cost would have been to install the scrubbers. So numbers matter very much in Beijing, but they have to sometimes be taken as a relative factor, not as true numerical intelligence. Next slide, please. Let me talk for a few minutes about the military balance. I'm not going to show pictures of ships and tanks and artillery pieces and so forth, because I don't think that's really the most important factor. The most important factor, frankly, is budget. Any conversation about strategy or tactics or military power really, in my mind, comes down to budget, to dollars and cents. How much money do you have to buy missiles and ships and so forth? How much money do you need to execute a reasonable strategy? Based on my 3 years in the Pentagon and the Navy staff a long time ago, strategy documents tend to be powerless without the dollars to back them up. Our nominal defense budget is often quoted as $1.5 trillion. I don't know that that includes such factors as veterans benefits, Atomic Energy Commission nuclear sources, and various other things. China claims a military budget of $238 million. The best guess is that's at least half of what the actual military budget is, for the same sort of soft factors that one might apply to the true U.S. military budget. Quantity and quality. Again, we're looking at numbers here. China, for instance, right now has the biggest Navy in the world. They have more large warships than the United States Navy does. But we don't have a real firm grasp on the readiness of the Chinese forces, not as much as the readiness of our forces. The other factor, of course, is engagement. Our military has been very busy recently, obviously in Iran and elsewhere. China's has not. There's been some company-sized clashes on the Indian border, for instance, in the last few years. Nothing that has real national impact in military terms. The other item of readiness that interests me has to do with corruption and productivity. The productivity of the two nations' defense industries is obviously of prime concern. Ours is stressed, China's is developing. We often read of corruption in the Chinese military, primarily having to do with financial corruption on the part of private individuals. My favorite story is the vice admiral many years ago who was head of Navy logistics, who in one of his 3 mansions around the country found that supposedly was storing gold ingots, the bars, in the basement of his Shanghai house. But what concerns me more, or I think is more important than financial corruption, is readiness corruption. In other words, as various military units go through testing and readiness examinations out in the field and so forth, are those examining them actually objective? Or is their wife's third cousin the commanding officer of the unit they're investigating? I think operational corruption is a very real problem in China's military. And this is magnified, in my view, by the fact that China's military is a Leninist military. That is, it has dual chains of command, one military and one political. I'll cite a Chinese destroyer, for instance, since that's the area I'm most familiar with. There might be a Navy captain as the commanding officer, the operational commanding officer of that destroyer. He will have a political commissar of equal or superior rank theoretically sharing in the decision-making process for that ship. Now, that may be well and good when it comes to assigning training importance or training schedules, but if one is in an operation at sea and the two captains disagree, theoretically the political commissar is superior. That could at least inculcate a certain delay in tactical decision-making, in my view. And I think maybe a real constraint on Chinese military performance. I'll also note that just last week, intelligence sources, open source sources, reported an increased 1 month special step down to increase political education at the division and corps commander levels in the Chinese military. More power to them. I hope they spend a lot more time on political education than they do on military training. That said, back in the late 1990s, a delegation of Chinese Air Force officers, visited Maxwell Air Force Base, where the U.S. Air Force obviously has a lot of schoolers and educational activities. In the report that the CIA translated from that PLA Air Force visit, they were surprised at how much, quote, political education, unquote, was being conducted in the U.S. Air Force. Well, I think what they meant by that was what we in the U.S. Navy used to consider general military training, equal opportunity for men and women, racial equality, get out the vote, savings bonds, that sort of thing. So I think we have to be careful on how we classify operational versus political activities in the Chinese Navy. Most important, I think, is areas of responsibility. We still have a global military. I don't know what the latest count of special forces engagement is. I think it's something 82 different countries around the world have U.S. special forces details in them. The U.S. Navy has basically the same global responsibilities that it had in the mid-1980s at the height of the Cold War. And yet we have less than half the number of ships we had in the mid-1980s. China, on the other hand, is much more regionally focused inside what is often referred to as the first island chain. That is the island chain that begins in the Kamchatka Peninsula, goes down through the Japanese archipelago, through Okinawa, Taiwan, the Philippines, and then west to the end of the Indonesian archipelago. That is, to me, is their primary area of responsibility. Secondary is the area within the second island chain, which is a concept beginning again with the Kamchatka Peninsula through the Japanese archipelago, this time a little bit more east, through the Bonin archipelago, which includes Iwo Jima, through the Marianas Islands, again a little further east, and then down through the Philippines and west through Indonesia. The Chinese sometimes refer to a third island chain, but all they mean is going from the Aleutian Islands down to Hawaii. And one of the heads of the Chinese Navy about 20 years ago suggested, supposedly facetiously, that we allow China to rule the seas out to the third island chain and we would have everything east of that. So the fact that they have a larger Navy simply enables them to more competently, if you will, cover the area within the first and second island chains. This is an area that we have to be very concerned with, and that within which we have to rely more and more strongly on our allies. And I'll note that we have very strong defense relationships with South Korea, Japan, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, somewhat less so with Thailand, and friendly relations with most of the other nations in the area. China, on the other hand, has as allies North Korea, Laos, which I think still has more elephants than it does people, Cambodia, and to a disputed extent, Pakistan. So the Allied lineup certainly does not favor China, despite its geographic and economic dominance. It seems to me that the strongest point when we consider possible conflict in Asia, or how we consider the military balance between the United States and China, is the factor of will. And this is very Clausewitzian. You know, at the National War College, we spend a lot of time studying Karl von Clausewitz, as well as the Sun Tzu, the great Chinese strategist, and so forth. And it seems to me that the will of the people to resist, if one is considering a conflict in a given country, are we considering that it's going to be the Battle of Great Britain, where the population will resist to the bitter end? Or is it going to be something much less than that? And my final bullet on this slide concerns the possibility of conflict between the United States and China, a nation which consists of about 1/5 of the world's population and has nuclear weapons. And this is, I think, my favorite statement from Karl Clausewitz. Don't start a war if you don't know what that's going to involve. Next slide, please. And Dr. Watson is going to spend more time on that here in just a moment. My final slide is, I'm looking for one that depicts the area of responsibility for the U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii.
Yes, it's up, Chuck, Bud.
Yes?
Yes, it's up.
Okay, thank you. In the mid-1980s, as a brand new captain, brand new 06, I was head of the Plans Division for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, home port in Hawaii. And our concern in that area, in that time frame, was very simple. It was possible global nuclear war with the Soviet Union. As a planner, it made life fairly straightforward.
Good.
Today, however, as you can appreciate, in addition to the increasing threat from Russia, although it's not terribly increasing in the Pacific, and the vastly increased status of China and other concerns in this area, life as a planner for the Pacific Command is much more complicated. I'll also note that as you look to the left-hand side of the slide, that vertical line, I hope you can see it, represents the western boundary of the Pacific Command's area of responsibility. In my day, that line consisted of the east coast of Africa. So we have finally separated out the tremendous concerns and efforts we have been expending in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. It's a different world today, both militarily, economically, and to an extent socially and culturally, as China has fulfilled the Napoleonic era forecast of becoming truly a world power. I'll turn it over now to Dr. Watson.
Thank you. Can I have the next slide, please, about strategy and actions?
Okay, it's up.
Great, thank you. I want to also take a moment to thank everyone in Texas, and again, apologize for us not being there. We've had a bad last 4 weeks, and had we come down there, I'm not sure we would have had the energy to speak by the end of the day between my broken arm and Bud's medical problem that cropped up last week. So we are apologetic for not being there, but we do thank all the efforts that everyone has made to get us there, and we're sorry to miss being with you. My role today is to contextualize as best I can some thinking by the Communist Party of China about how they play their role in great power competition or anything else. Because to an extent, everything I'm going to say, and all I have is on this single slide, everything that China does is kind of uniform in how it approaches the world. But there's 3 caveats that I have to make up front that are absolutely fundamental in my mind to understanding China today. The first of those is that the overall objective of the Communist Party is not to worry about the United States in the first island chain. It is not to worry about Taiwan. That may surprise some of you. It is not to worry about what their relationship is with Russia. The primary objective of the Communist Party is to retain power. Now, that may sound obvious. No party wants to give up power. I completely understand that. But the Communist Party, whatever its many flaws, and it is a deeply flawed organization, has managed to elevate the lives of people from the abject poverty that they confronted when Mao mercifully died in September of 1976 after running China even further into the ground after a century of humiliation as they see it, where the foreigners picked and chose what they wanted out of China and treated it simply as a repository for goods that they could take back to empire building. But the Communist Party, beginning with the four modernizations in roughly 1974, 1976, have transformed that country. They therefore, again, that doesn't mean we have to accept it, but they therefore have merited retaining power to continue this modernization for the Chinese people. They also are mindful of what happened in the revolution of 1989 that brought down the Berlin Wall, and they don't particularly want to be hanging in the gallows of Tiananmen Square. I mean, there's some very serious things that the CCP needs to be held accountable for, not merely during the Maoist period. But that's their primary goal. Everything else is secondary. So when Xi Jinping gets up tomorrow morning, it is likely that what is going to be on his mind is how many protests might there be on the streets of Langzhou, which is a city out in Gansu province, how many ethnic problems have cropped up, what are the state of water sufficiencies across the country, because China's desperate for water. And so our concept that what they think about first and foremost must be great power competition with us, I don't think is borne out by what we see them do. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would add that we don't think about often enough when Dr. Cole mentioned it being a Leninist military, the Chinese military is an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. They do not take an oath to the Constitution of China. China does, by the way, have a constitution. It's a lovely, very detailed document that virtually nobody ever reads, much less follows. But the military of China will therefore take orders from the civilians when it comes to decision-making, as best we understand it at the strategic level. As Dr. Cole has already said, there are some real problems with that, but it's something that we don't often enough think about. Third thing, and this is perhaps going to sound controversial, but I think that it bears some humility on our part. The Communist Party, by design, is a very opaque system. So it's difficult for any of us to, in fact, know what is going on because they don't want us to. To me, that's a sign of a very weak party, not just a very strong party. But it also means that as we spin out scenarios and we say, well, we have evidence of X, Y, Z, we need to be very clear what that evidence is, and we need to be able to put that evidence under some scrutiny. Because sometimes I hear some things that just don't sync with what I see happening. Not that I am unique. There are many people whose Chinese is infinitely better than mine, who still struggle with knowing for absolute certainty what is happening behind closed doors. Literally right now, the Beidahe meeting, which is an annual meeting in the Beidahe resort in Northeast China to get away from the heat, the meeting of the Communist Party is taking place. And everything in China has shut down right now, certainly foreign observers, because we will not know unless something absolutely miraculous happens, what the substance of those debates are. That's, again, the nature of their system. That is what they want us to be in the dark about. We have things we don't want other states to know either, but not to any degree the way China does. But that then takes us to one of the points that Dr. Cole made that I just would like to really reiterate, and that is China therefore does not have public accountability. Public accountability means you can check statistics, means you can check what statements were made. It means you can follow through on things. China doesn't have that. And therefore, as you go to my slide here, when you look at strategy as a dynamic interchange between context, as someone sees it, which is the heart of assumptions, looking at instruments of statecraft, whether they are diplomatic, whether they are economic, whether they are social, whether they are cultural, whether they are increasingly AI or something along those lines. All of those things are changing on a constant basis, but we're not entirely sure how China evaluates those changes. But each and every change will have consequences, and each and every change will also involve some intangibles that is very easy to forget, such as political will, such as what is the priority right now on keeping unemployment at a lower level. How are they doing that? So those are all things that are, I think, incredibly important in thinking about China so that we do not mirror image our own experience onto them. Second thing, China is hypersensitive to the idea of sovereignty, to the idea that anything that can challenge them to imply that a foreign country, right now, they're focusing on the United States. 150 years ago, they were primarily focusing on Britain. But what they worry about is that foreigners can undermine the future of the country by taking steps that will deliberately deflate China's ability to be the cultural center of Asia that it's been for 5,000 years. And therefore, China is very sensitive to that. And it means that what we sometimes expect China to do, because it seems logical to us, may not be the way that they approach something. And yet, so many of our conversations about what we want to do to China do in thwarting activities by China, all too often seem to imply that China doesn't have any autonomy on its own. It does. It has plenty of autonomy. And that autonomy may mean that China reacts in ways that we simply could not fathom because they are determined not to surrender an inch of that sovereignty to anyone else, the United States, Australia, or anyone else. So that's important. Third thing, when Richard Nixon went to China in 1972, it will be 55 years this coming February. He did not go to China, as is often portrayed today, to open China to foreign trade. That was not the primary goal. The primary goal was to pressure the Soviets in the summer of 1972 into signing nuclear agreements. We were successful. In 1972, we had the START agreement, and we had the SALT agreement, and we also had the ABM treaty. Those were landmark international agreements that the United States signed because we had given the Russians a pause in their thinking about how China could play into an international crisis. The idea of opening the door to China is certainly discussed in the declassified documents that we've seen, whether they were Henry Kissinger's notes or Nixon's memoirs or a number of other documents that the federal government holds on the trip in 1972 and then subsequent meetings. But all too often, right in 2026, we become absorbed in thinking we failed in dealing with China because China's economy grew. That simply doesn't make any sense when you look at the historic record. But this is part of why I say that actions in the international system as a result of strategy create consequences. We saw China that was dirt poor in 1972. As I said earlier, Mao doesn't die until September of 1976, and he had done some horrible things to an already war-torn country. But it was the effect of China reaching out into the world that, again, secondarily led to the economic growth and led them to actually do missions around the world, US and Europe by and large, to see what the rest of the world looked like after World War II. That was news to China because they had been domestically absorbed trying to consolidate the power of the Communist Party. So when we worry about whether we've failed or succeeded with China, we've gone 55 years without a nuclear exchange that was very worrisome in 1972. That certainly strikes me as having had a tremendous benefit for every single one of us on this call. But that didn't mean that we should have expected that there wouldn't be some other consequences. Many US consumers would say that the growth of the Chinese economy with its export base has been very good for the rest of the world. But it has also given China the money that they've been able to modernize their military, they've been able to modernize their society, and they've modernized all of the instruments of statecraft that they use. And that's what the next bullet's about. China is far more likely to wield any and all instruments of national power, whether it's trade, whether it is scientific innovation, whether it's research, incentives for cooperation with other countries, whether it's diplomacy, you name it, China is willing to use it. It's one of the ways that we are most clearly diverging from China in the bilateral relationship, because the United States, particularly in roughly the same era, I would take it back to the Reagan administration, our focus has been increasingly on the military instrument of statecraft. China has certainly modernized the PLA, no question about it, as Dr. Cole said, but China has also even more strongly modernized their economic ties. They've used all of the aspects of power as they see it, that comprehensive national power, in order to open doors into other societies. And let me give you two quick examples. One is that they have incentivized countries to have better ties with them for the purpose of vaccines back during the pandemic. They were not as good a quality as the vaccines that were offered in Western Europe or the United States. But for countries that were not going to get those vaccines because of the initial shortages, the Chinese vaccine was better than nothing. At the same time, about a decade ago, when South Korea decided that they were going to deploy a THAAD system aimed at North Korea, but China didn't want a THAAD system in Asia at all for fear that it could be used against them, the Chinese used what I could only call Circle K diplomacy against the South Koreans by attacking not physically attacking, but by disincentivizing Chinese sales in the Korean small markets called lattes, disincentivizing tourism to South Korea, which was a big financial blow. So China will use instruments and they will use them in whatever way they see as achieving their national interest. We often overestimate our ability to change China's minds on things, but they are very clear. It's one of the effects of having a one-party state that they are much clearer on their priorities than we are in many cases. We have public policy debate. I think all of us support that public policy debate. But China has been much clearer in knowing what they want and therefore knowing what they are not going to bend on. So I think we all too often overestimate what we're going to change them on. My last comment is one for you to think about as we open the door to the question and answer period. And that's this idea of, do we misunderstand the weakness of the China that we saw in 1949, 1972, whatever year you want, but basically beginning with the Century of Humiliation in 1842, when the foreigners came and had to open the ports under the agreements after the Opium War. Do we misunderstand that that was an anomaly in Chinese history, or are we only assuming that that's the China that we will have to deal with in the future? It's a question worth thinking. One more slide, please, and I'll leave you with 2 quotes. Next slide, please.
Okay, it's up. This is your 2 observations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bud and I each have an observation that we would ask you to also keep in mind. The first is a quote from the great international relations theorist at University of Chicago, Hans Morgenthau, about the question of a weak ally forcing you into decisions. National interests are what usually guide a nation's path forward. The question of whether a weak ally ought to be, our alliance is more important than national interest is basically what it comes down to. My quote that I give you from Sir Edward Grey is something that he said immediately before World War I, which, as we all know, was an extraordinarily bitter experience for multiple empires, and arguably Europe has never been the same since. So it's worth thinking that conflict can change things, and it can change it pretty fundamental for generations to come. That's not to argue that conflict can't happen or shouldn't happen if we make a national decision to do that, if it were to become necessary, but it is worth thinking about. With that, let me turn it back over to you for the questions. We look forward to them.
Okay, great. A lot to think there. Now, we have one more slide, Cynthia, the Taiwan Relations Act. Would you want to talk about that?
That we might use that later if someone's interested, but we didn't plan to use that one with this thus far.
Okay. Let's see if we can get you back on the screen. There we go. Well, thank you so much. That was a great overview and opens up a lot of questions. I want to remind you that the floor is open for questions. I do have, there's the first one. I do have 2 now. And also that email address on top of the question cards will work if you want to send me a question. So I've got a couple of opening questions, one for Brian and one for Cynthia. And by the way, Mark Liebman and Jim Blythe did a wonderful hour video with Cynthia and Bud last week. It's we call it a teaser video, but it's sort of preview what we're going to talk about. If you go to our website and look at the Read More section for this program, you'll find that YouTube, and it's really good. And I want to, Bud, ask you a question about something you said on that video. And we've actually already had one question from the audience. We know that the Chinese military watch carefully what the United States does and how we conduct ourselves in war. Could you take us back, start maybe with Desert Storm, and sort of reprise what you think the PLA has learned from watching us operate?
You about Desert Storm, what you said on the video, Desert Storm, about the Chinese observing us in 1990.
The Chinese have spent a decade, 1980s, after Deng Xiaoping announced the 4 modernizations. The Chinese military has spent almost a decade trying to modernize and had a great deal of satisfaction in what they did. And then they saw us conduct Desert Storm, Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and realized not only were they not catching up, but they'd fallen further behind. And they took that to heart. They especially looked at air power and space power. And they have advanced tremendously in the last quarter century in both of those, both in manned aircraft and drone technology, and in the use of satellites. I forget the exact number, the thousands of satellites they have in orbit right now and servicing all sorts of military and civilian needs. So they watch us very carefully, and they continue to learn from what they observe our forces doing, or have observed our forces have done in Iraq and Afghanistan and right now in Iran. They're very apt students. I don't think they allow their egos to get in their way of learning from others, and in this case, particularly the United States.
Let me ask you a follow-up, Bud. I've always thought that some of the strengths of the U.S. military include the realistic training that we do. I mean, I've been to Red Flag, and it's tougher than combat. The ruthless evaluation and debriefing for exercises, the initiative that we give to our junior officers, and especially the senior NCO Corps that we have. And those are very tough cultural things to get around. Have you seen evidence that China is doing any of those things?
Well, the two of the standard questions in the 1990s I know that I would face from Chinese interlocutors were exactly those, General, was how do we develop a senior NCO Corps? And number two was how do we train junior officers and senior petty officers? The first thing they did by the end of the first decade of this century, obviously, was create 3 different types of ROTC type units. They at civilian universities in China. They ended those rather suddenly in 2018. 2018, for reasons that took us a while to understand, and we finally think that the reason they ended those civilian university military programs because they felt that the newly commissioned officers were not as politically reliable as those new officers who graduated from the military academies. So here again is an instance of a Leninist military placing, from our point of view, overemphasis on political reliability. As far as the NCO Corps business is concerned, in the mid-1990s, and I think up into the end of the 90s, the longest a person could enlist in the Chinese military was 17 years. 17 years you were considered to have completed your career. That's changed. Obviously, they now have the same sort of 30-year career pattern that we do. I don't know how effective that's been. A friend of mine who served as both Army Attaché and Assistant Army Attaché and Defense Attaché in China, and one of the people I respect the most, doesn't think that culturally that the Chinese military will ever be able to emulate the U.S. and NCO Corps. I think back to when I was an ensign on my first ship, standing on the forecastle, addressing a division of a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds and saying, here's what we're going to do today, guys. And the senior chief behind me tapped me on the shoulder and said, what the ensign really means is, okay, I'm not sure that that's going to really take effect. But they have certainly taken very extensive steps to emulate us in those and other areas as well.
Cynthia, I have one for you. So Xi Jinping is triple-headed, I think, in the government, most well-known as the president of the PRC, but he's 73 years old. Normally, historically, the Chinese have valued a peaceful transition, orderly transition of power. As far as I know, Xi has not designated anyone as his heir apparent. In fact, he's purged a lot of his would-be rivals inside the party. And Bud, you mentioned the purges inside the military, which could be either just corruption or getting rid of other competing power bases. What's your thought about the future of Xi Jinping and his regime.
Well, this is a classic example of what I was saying about the lack of transparency having an effect on the way we assume things must be going. The people that I know we both have a friend, a scholar at the Hoover Institution, who can literally dig into the files and tell you every word that Xi Jinping has ever uttered in public that has been let out into public sources. And this individual cannot tell us the answer to that question for sure. What I would say that we're potentially, what we ought to be looking at is our focus is all too often on the fact that he is the General Secretary of the Communist Party and that he is the president of the country. Well, yes, okay, that part about those two positions is absolutely correct. But what matters of those positions, along with the third hat you mentioned, is the fact that he is the General Secretary of the Communist Party. He's the senior man on the Standing Committee of the Politburo.
Yes.
But he is not a king. He has to satisfy factions, or at least the senior people within the Communist Party, or he can be removed. It does not seem likely at this point for the reason that you mentioned, that he may have, and I've long assumed this, that he's been clearing out his political rivals through the purges. But there's another explanation, and one of the things I should have said about China is we tend to look for either or answers, and I'm as good at that as anybody else on China. When one of the things anybody you meet in the embassy is bound to tell you in the first 5 minutes you have a conversation with them is that two seemingly diametrically opposed things can be true in China at the same time, which is not comforting, but it's reality. The other possibility for why Xi Jinping has been so adamant about the anti-corruption campaign is Bud's point about the readiness of the PLA, questions as to whether that corruption has affected buying positions, buying senior positions. There are all sorts of stories that have been out there. But there also was a very compelling argument made in the late, first year he was in office, saying that Xi Jinping came into power very mindful of the party history. His father had been a senior official in the PLA. And Xi Jinping understood that the public had become so disillusioned with the generals with ingots in their basement and the 22-year-olds crashing Ferraris on the 6th Ring Road at 3 o'clock in the morning with a couple of women who were not his sisters in the car with him. And that the public cynicism about the party by the end of Hu Jintao, the fourth generation leaders, 10 years in power, that the public cynicism had grown to dangerous levels. And that Xi Jinping believed he had to address corruption because if he didn't, then the party would lose. One of the things that one cannot avoid seeing about his behavior in power is that there has been a consistent line in trying to buck up the power of the party in China. Maybe not take it back to the point where everyone lives in a Dan way, where their work and their family and everything else is in the same building together. It's not quite that level. But the role of the party in directing the economy, the role of the party in helping people's lives, because it is supposed to be a people's party, is something that he has buttressed. And it may very well be that he simply sees his role as uniquely able to do that. That usually leads to a fall, as you rightly point out, as people tire of someone. But it certainly strikes me as a possible, plausible explanation, along with the idea that he simply doesn't want any sort of competition. We know he's a vain man, because you cannot show a cartoon in China of Winnie the Pooh, because about 5 years ago, there was a picture of Winnie the Pooh that was put next to Xi Jinping walking, and they did look strikingly similar.
Well, that got a good laugh if you're not hearing the feedback from the audience. There's maybe a related question here, and I think you guys touched on this in the interview the other day. To what degree is the Chinese leadership afraid of the people of China? Do they see that as a constituency they have to pay attention to?
Say,
We have to listen to party members. Xi Jinping has definitely ignored economists who told him he needs to reform the economy by getting the state less involved. He is, on almost every count, ignored reform, calls for reform. So it's certainly not senior business people, but his power base is the party. I don't know, you have a different view?
No, I think that's absolutely true. And in fact, the efforts to sort of control or monitor the population of China under Xi Jinping have increased dramatically. Several years, I guess it was about 3 years ago, they established something that we usually translate as a social credit score. The idea that everybody is either politically reliable only to a certain extent or not, and the government wants to know how politically reliable all its citizens are in theory. And another interesting fact here is that China's budget for internal security exceeds its defense budget.
wow.
Think about that for a minute. All the domestic security organizations have more money theoretically than the military does. One final statement, or one other statement, Cynthia mentioned the difficulties of the Chinese language. I'm always amazed when I see two native Chinese speakers arguing about the best way to translate a certain set of the ideographs that make up Mandarin. It's a very difficult language to learn, and as far as speaking is concerned, the various domestic variations amount to separate languages in several cases. So it's another problem in observing and trying to figure out exactly what's going on inside China. And it's something of a hindrance even domestically for Chinese organization.
Well, we have a couple of questions here that I think sort of get to the heart of the thing that's on everybody's mind. I'll just back up a little bit. I read a book by Michael Pillsbury a couple of years ago called The 100-Year Marathon, and his posit was that 2049 is going to be a key date for China because it's the 100th anniversary of the PRC. There's going to be pressure to reunite China with Taiwan. We've also heard more recently some senior military folks say that 2027 is a key date for some reason. If you had a crystal ball, what does your crystal ball say about a military action or quasi-military action against Taiwan?
Well, I've known Mike Pillsbury for many, many years, and he's got real credibility in many circles on Chinese analysis. He was Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld's right-hand man as far as China is concerned. I don't agree with Mike on the 100-year program. I don't think that any bureaucracy, and God knows China has a complex bureaucracy, can plan something and carry it out over 100 years and over all those generations. I will note that I thought China had invented bureaucracy until the first time I tried to get an Indian passport.
You need a visa.
Indian visa route, excuse me, and then I discovered the Indians took second place to nobody. What was the second part of that?
The
2027?
about Taiwan.
That was the Admiral
Davidson.
when he was Pacific Commander who last on at 2027, and it is an anniversary. I don't think there's any real strong evidence that that means that in 2027 there's going to be assault. What Xi Jinping said was he directed the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take on all contingencies by 2027. What's interesting is that you'll never hear, at least I never have, heard a senior political official in China talk about defense issues or the military without emphasizing that the army of China is a party army, as Cynthia mentioned earlier. They are always very concerned about the military reliability and the military's loyalty to the Communist Party.
We think, and again, we can't go back and look at the congressional record of China, but there is some evidence that despite weekly reminders under as many Chinese leaders as I can remember over the last 35 years, telling the PLA that it's a party army, which think about that. The fact that they have to remind them weekly that they are a party army, it should be worrisome to Zhang Nanghai, the leadership compound. But the fact that the party has had to tell them that doesn't dismiss concerns that many analysts think they saw at the end of again, in the late period, say 2008 to 2012, concerns that the party was seeing the army potentially disgruntled over the Taiwan question. And some analysts believe that what was actually happening was that the PLA was pressuring the leadership to go on and do something about Taiwan. Every Chinese leader is aware of Taiwan. They have built themselves into a box. They are the ones that have brought up Taiwan since the Maoist era and talked about how important it is for national reunification, yada, 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 because there's fear that the party will be held accountable for, quote, losing this island that was supposed to be part of the motherland. It's been part of the motherland since 1644, not since 644 or 644 BC. It has only been under the Qing dynasty and up until the end of the actually till 1895 when the Japanese took over Taiwan. But that's again, this question of whether 2027, I agree with exactly what Bud said. Saying that you want your military to be ready for something does not say that you're going to invade, but our concern remains that Taiwan has not seen the growth in its military power that China has. But Taiwan's a country of 24 million people. China is a country now down around 1.2 billion. And that is a reality, along with that 100 nautical miles that Bud mentioned earlier.
Okay, so I've got a few more questions, but I want to give you guys a chance to ask live questions. So, Mark and Rich, would you guys grab the microphones? In fact, Rich, you can be the first question if you want.
We've got them up.
There's one over here, I think, on the corner. It should be one over here, I guess. Cynthia, while they're getting the microphones, let me ask one more question. This came from a question card from the audience. It said, what is the concern today about why the Chinese are buying up large amounts of land adjacent to our U.S. military installations?
I said China will use any instrument available. There is no question that there have been some very curious land purchases near U.S. military bases. There have been curious land purchases in agricultural areas. The Chinese like to test limits. Having said that, China is also still, to this day, I would argue, relatively risk averse. But they do test boundaries to see how far those boundaries will go. That doesn't mean that they will cross them, but they have certainly done some things that were curious. On the other hand, that means I suspect we weren't paying a lot of attention.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but Rich, do you have a question?
So the question to everybody is that, with the U.S. Pacific Command, going back to almost every island in World War II and rebuilding them, the Tinians, the Guams, the whatever, this must be causing a pucker factor to China that if they want to really extend themselves in the Pacific, they're going to have they have their own issue of resupply if they're doing this. You think our play of scraping over the old stuff and rebuilding is going to help us?
Well, if I understood your question clearly, sir, I just came across a map from the State Department the other day which showed our increased investment in the past decade in the Southwest Islands. Historically, of course, as you say, these date back to World War II. And in fact, in 1947, the Joint Chiefs of Staff came out with a plan to maintain our defense capabilities throughout the islands in the South and Southwest Pacific, over which we had fought in so many cases during World War II. The plan went nowhere because it ignored budget, as most plans in the Pentagon do that don't have the budget behind them. China's investment have been pushing everywhere they can, primarily for economic reasons. However, any foreign economic investment with China is bound to have some defense association with it, no matter how low key. The answer is simple. If we think that it's dangerous for China to invest in the Marshall Islands or the Federated States of Micronesia or Fiji or someplace, then we should make a counter investment. And in fact, as far as the South Pacific island territories are concerned, Tuvalu, Nauru, Vanuatu, Fiji, the Cook Islands, and so forth, Australia and New Zealand have the lead on that, and they have been devoting increased attention and budgetary resources to make sure that we maintain our proper Western influence in those small territories. If you're the leader of some small island republic, and China comes along and says, we'll give you $10 million for port modernization, and you go to the United States or Australia and you don't get a counteroffer, you're going to go with the Chinese offer. It's pretty straightforward, I think.
Yep.
Dave, do you have a question?
Yes. Okay, it's on. To what extent do you think the Chinese Communist Party is working the Taiwan issue on a non-military basis?
I think that's the way they want to go. They don't want to inherit a smoking ruin, an island over which they fought. I am convinced that there is already a shadow government, a quisling government in Taiwan, well established and ready to go. I'm assuming that there are Chinese representatives throughout the Taiwan military. There are too many families in Taiwan that still have strong family roots on the mainland, and there's too many cross-channel, cross-strait economic investments for me not to think that the two entities are a lot closer on a day-to-day basis than we account for. So I think the Communist Party is working, or the Chinese government rather, is working very assiduously for a non-military absorption of Taiwan back to the mainland's control.
Taiwan's primary economic partner is China, which does not make a lot of sense in light of the existential concerns that they have, but that is reality. As Bud said much earlier, every state in Asia, their primary economic partner is China, their number one partner. And that has not changed in the last decade, and there's not a lot of reason to expect that it will, but especially not in Taiwan.
Mark, do you have a question? And by the way, for planning, we're going to wrap this up in about 10 minutes. I believe, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to feature these folks on your show tomorrow, is that correct?
Oh, 1 o'clock. It probably will be posted by Wednesday on YouTube and Facebook. Then it goes to the network. So it will be played on the network, DVTV, Internet TV, firefighter road crew and all that. Next Saturday at 9 o'clock and, Tuesday at 9 o'clock.
Okay, and we're gonna take any unanswered questions that we don't get to on question cards or email, feed those into, Jim's show, and I think Mark's gonna MC that.
Yeah,
So-
I'm
so
gonna be the monitor, and I've got more questions that we have not touched on here, because we could be doing this for days. So I'm gonna shift to the economic question. The theft of intellectual property has, at least from I spent 20 odd years as a management consultant, is a serious problem for Western powers. The Chinese signed the WTO's documents saying we're never gonna do this again, and it continues unabated. How do you think that's played into A, their economic growth, and B, what do you see them doing in the future in this area?
I see them continuing to use all instruments that they see as available. We have a trade-off that we all too often don't think about. And that obviously, those of us in this room are thinking about it right now. But innovation is an open process. It's one of the things about our system that has made it thrive. And China has found that that is something that they are happy to exploit. I used to travel to China with some business people. A number of them actually were in Dallas. And we would have conversations with people on the ground about this very question. And this would have been almost 20 years ago. And you'd get a couple of different answers from the Chinese, which would be, well, we're passing laws on that. And they do pass laws. They do implement some of the things that we want them to implement, that we think are both reasonable, we think they're good practices, and we also believe that they are just practices. The problem is they don't rank highly enough in the party's objectives to satisfy us necessarily. So I don't see that is likely to change. I understand they've signed things, they've signed a lot of things. But it turns out that enforcement of some of these agreements and enforcements of international norms is much harder than we recognize that it was. That's not giving them a pass. That is not comforting for those who have lost their intellectual property. But it became a challenge. People could either be in a position where they were encouraging innovation, they were encouraging synergy of thought. China got into that, or they could remain more closed and probably more limited. That is unpleasant, that is uncomfortable, that is disappointing, that is infuriating, but it is, I'm afraid, where we are. I don't see any likelihood it's going to change.
The bottom line, as expressed to a delegation I was with, visiting the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai about several years ago, was, yeah, China's guilty of all these bad practices, but we're still making money. And as long as we are, we're going to stay in China.
Okay.
Very quickly, talk about China's reworking of the Silk Road and their investments in Africa.
China, this goes to when Bud was talking about what's going on in the Southwest Pacific. Same principle applies in Africa, same principle applies in Central Asia, and applies in Latin America. The United States is what worries China. They don't want to go head-to-head with us in a lot of places, which is why they've largely stayed out of Mexico, for example. Not entirely, but largely. Africa is a part of the world that the United States has not been interested in, have not. George W. Bush was probably the most invested U.S. president in Africa, and we have rolled back over the last now almost 20 years since he left office. We have rolled back many of those investments. China is willing to go into a place that they can offer money, they can offer to build sports arenas, They can build infrastructure because they can then get what they want out of it, whether it's minerals, whether it's foodstuff, whether it's petroleum, and that's exactly what they're doing. So, and that's true throughout the region. One of the things that I've been talking about for over 20 years in Latin America is that the United States were genuinely involved in a partnership with Latin America, then China wouldn't bother with it. But that's why they're involved in Latin America.
All right, I've got one last question, and then I'm going to go to Scott for the final question. During most of my professional life, Russia was the big threat, and China was sort of on the margins of our concerns. What today? And I mean, Xi and Putin have declared a no limits partnership. So what does that mean? What's the dynamic between Russia and China these days?
Okay. Well, it's interesting that up until about the early 1990s, China and Russia had only been sort of friendly for about 3 years in the very early 1920s. But the relationship has held, I think, primarily because China wants Russia's energy reserves from Siberia, and they're slowly accruing those. 20 years ago was a question as to whether Russia would build its Siberian pipelines to Japan's benefit or China's. That question was long ago resolved in China's favor. Similarly, the Central Asian energy reserves, which up until the 1990s were directed almost entirely towards Western Europe and Russia, that's no longer the case, since China has attempted to, if not monopolize, then dominate the energy reserves of Central Asia. It's an ongoing contest between Moscow and Beijing. I think it may result in points of conflict in the future. I can't believe that Vladimir Putin has resolved himself to the loss of all the former Soviet republics. But right now, China has gotten the most benefit from the relationship.
Let me add one other quick thing. It's another case of actions having unintended consequences. The Tiananmen Square sanctions that are still in place after June 4th, 1989, meant that the Chinese military couldn't get any technology from the United States, couldn't get any help from the United States. Russia didn't have any money coming in as the Soviet Union fell apart. So China could buy technology from Russia, and that was the original reason that the relationship improved. Now, 37 years later, we see where it is.
Thank you. Scott?
Well, as John said when we started this, we're almost, all of us are most sorry that you couldn't be here in person, but and we'll certainly keep you in our thoughts and prayers as we move forward. But let me ask you this. What you have done, this is our 25th event that we've had, and the National Defense Briefing Series has had some incredible people here that we've had an opportunity to listen to. But I'm sure that many here tonight would agree with me that this was above and beyond. And certainly when you talk about a country like China, it's something that we have heard about since we were all in the second grade. I mean, it's one of those scenarios that's always been there in our lifetime. So my question to you is, with all the incredible information that you've shared with us tonight, I mean, it's been above and beyond. What is the take-home that you would like us to leave here with? What should we be most concerned about this country known as China, and what we might share with our friends and our family, what we should be aware of, what we should be concerned about, and what's the take-home from both of you as we walk out the door tonight?
My quick statement would be that as the relationship moves forward, it's not that our national policy should not concentrate on retarding or tearing down China, but on strengthening the United States in those areas which we believe need to be strengthened, economically, militarily, socially, even linguistically.
Yeah, and the variation on what I said earlier about how we approach things is exactly what Bud said. I mean, we have control over ourselves. We don't have nearly as much control over China as we think. But I would also just offer that as I step back and look, at what I see developing in China and what I see developing in this country. I think, frankly, we have a lot more in common with China than we realize. And that may make us uncomfortable. That may make them uncomfortable, for that matter. But the reality is we are both two of the largest land masses, two of the largest populations, two of the largest complex societies. And there are no easy answers to the questions that are being asked. They're all really hard questions, and we need to remember that. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Bud and Cynthia, thank you so much. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for spending our time. You probably don't know, we actually came out at 3 p.m. and Bud and Cynthia were with us via Zoom, and we wanted to make sure we worked out all the bugs in our technology. So we didn't quite get there, but they spent nearly 4 hours of their time on a Sunday afternoon with us. We wish you guys a quick recovery. We owe you a Tex-Mex meal. So when you come to Dallas next time, we've got a spot all picked out, and we'll take you there. I'm going to turn it back over to Scott Murray, and we're going to do some things, including a drawing, part of which money will go to your charity. You're welcome to stay on, or if you're just exhausted, you're welcome to click off. But again, Scott, back to you, and thank you so much.